Ed Felton is the founding director at the Center for Information Technology Policy and Robert E. Kahn Professor of Computer Science and Public Affairs at Princeton University. Ed's research includes computer security and privacy, especially relating to media and consumer products and technology law and policy. Specific topics include software security, internet security, electronic voting, cybersecurity policy, and government transparency. In addition, he was chief technologist of the U.S. Federal Trade Commission in 2011-2012. He has been a faculty member of Princeton University since 1993. But what's really important is Ed's going to tell us what Bitcoin is, why we should know about it, and what happened at Mt. Gox.
I hate to disappoint you right from the start, but I can't tell you the full story of what happened to Mt. Gox. Nobody really knows. I'll give you some excellent speculation later, though. I'd like to talk some about Bitcoin. This is something that's obviously a hot topic in the news with the failure of Mt. Gox, the largest Bitcoin exchange, and the loss of perhaps up to $400 million of assets in that collapse, as well as Newsweek today running a story claiming to have discovered the secret identity of the real inventor of Bitcoin, although I'm skeptical. So it's a hot topic right now, and it is frankly a little bit of a fad, although I'm going to argue that it's not just a fad, that there is a there, and that Bitcoin represents an actually important trend or a development in the fusing of technology with finance. Bitcoin, in other words, is a new kind of thing that hasn't existed before, and which is going to have a significant impact on the way that we, especially in the technology world, interact with money. Okay, so just to get your attention, if you're not familiar with Bitcoin, let me give you some facts and figures. Bitcoins can be traded for dollars or yen or euros or other currencies in markets called Bitcoin exchanges. At current exchange rates between dollars and Bitcoins, the total value of all the Bitcoins in circulation is about $8 billion. In the Bitcoin system, there are about 75,000 transactions processed per day, and the total value of those transactions in dollars is measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars per day. So now, compared to the dollar economy, this is tiny, but it's now large enough to be a blip, which is a significant development, I think. But what is Bitcoin anyway? Bitcoin is often called a virtual currency. It's a form of money or currency, an exchangeable thing that exists only as ones and zeros. A Bitcoin is essentially just a big number. You can think of, if you think of a dollar bill or a piece of paper currency as having a serial number or an identifying number on it, a Bitcoin is identified with a kind of identifying number. But the Bitcoin is only the number. That is, if you say the number, that doesn't just designate the Bitcoin, that is the Bitcoin. What that means is that these things can be shipped around, and transactions in this currency can be done in an entirely electronic way. You can email Bitcoins to somebody. Every coin in the Bitcoin system is controlled by a secret key. That is, the system is based on cryptography, and you can imagine that there's a kind of secret key or secret password which is associated with the ownership of each coin. And so if you know the secret key, if you have access to the secret key or know the password, then you can spend that coin. You can transfer it to another account, to another secret key. And that's essentially all it is. There are these things, they exist, they're designated as having some value, and you can transfer them to each other. So a Bitcoin transaction, in order to make a Bitcoin transaction, I don't want to get too deeply into the ones and zeros, but roughly how it works is like this. A Bitcoin transaction is a digital object, which you can think of as being a lot like a check, writing a check. That is, the Bitcoin transaction has in it information about who's paying, information about who's receiving. There's an amount that's being paid that designates which coins and how much value is being paid. And the whole thing needs to be signed by the person who's paying. But in this case, it's a digital signature done using cryptography. So if I own some Bitcoins and I'd like to transfer them to Peter, I can make a digital transaction with my identifier and his identifier and a designator that points to some coins. I can digitally sign that, and then I take that digitally signed transaction object and I submit it to be posted on what's called the public ledger. Bitcoin has this structure called the public ledger, which is visible to everyone. And once that transaction, if that transaction is valid, meaning that it has a genuine signature and that I actually own the coins that I'm claiming to spend, and if it gets put on the public ledger, then it's official, it's happened, and Peter has the money, and he can then pass those coins on to someone else. That's pretty much all there is about the Bitcoin system. There are designators of value, there's a notion of ownership determined, controlled by these public keys or passwords, and there's the ability to transfer value. So all you need is that, plus people agreeing that this thing actually has value, and you have money. And the technological part is all about how you designate ownership and what a transaction is and so on. The thing that makes it currency, that makes it act like currency, is simply the shared expectation of people that you will be able to buy things with this in the future, or that you will continue to be able to exchange it for dollars in the future. The exchange rate between Bitcoins and dollars has gone up very substantially over the roughly 4 to 5 years that the system has existed. When I first learned about Bitcoins a couple of years ago, you could buy a Bitcoin for something like 50 cents. The current price is about $700 per Bitcoin. And so had I been either wise or brave enough to put my life savings into Bitcoin back then, I would be a very happy man right now. If you're thinking about it as an investment, let me tell you this, you will probably lose all your money, but you might make a lot. So if you're the kind of person who wants an investment where you'll probably lose all your money, but you might make 20 or 50 times what you put in, and you're a sophisticated investor, then you might think about Bitcoin. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. Okay, so one of the interesting things of Bitcoin is, and one of the questions that people often ask is, who's in charge of this thing? And the interesting answer is sort of nobody's in charge, or in a certain way, everybody's in charge. What I mean by that is this, that there's no central entity that issues Bitcoins. There's a set of rules that says when new Bitcoins come into existence and who owns them. There's a set of rules for tracking what makes a transaction, one of these digital checks, valid. So there's a set of rules that determines who owns which Bitcoins. And everyone, by consensus, follows those rules. Who makes the rules? Well, nobody makes the rules. The rules also exist by a kind of consensus. And the best analogy I can give to you is something like the rules of the English language, right? Which nobody is really in charge of. The language exists and is defined in practice by the speakers collectively. There are certain words and certain structures and certain usages which people will understand and other ones which they won't. And your incentive as a speaker is to use the standard usages so that people will understand what you're trying to say. So in the same way that there is a coherent idea of what the English language is, even though nobody's in charge of it, the same is roughly true of Bitcoin, that there are a set of rules which exist by consensus and which people do in practice follow. And if you join the system, it behooves you to follow those rules because otherwise you're not going to be happy with the result. That is, if you disagree with everyone else about who owns a Bitcoin, you'll probably be unhappy. Right? If you believe that you own a certain Bitcoin, but everybody else believes that Peter owns it, well, then really Peter owns it. The whole point of money is that people will accept it and believe that you own it. And so there's this interesting aspect of Bitcoin, which is a little bit hard to explain why this is true without getting fairly technical into the economics and computer science. But it's really true that no one is in charge, and you can't call up Bitcoin and talk to it, and the government can't order it to do anything. That's not just this sort of woo-woo philosophy. That's actually, there's actually some hard technology and economics behind that statement that it exists as a consensus. So who accepts this thing in payment? Well, if you own Bitcoins, you can spend them with some merchants. Probably Overstock.com is the merchant that most prominently accepts Bitcoins. But really, a lot of people who have Bitcoins use them for a few purposes. Some people buy them and hold them as an investment in the hope of selling them later when the exchange rate has gone up. And some people have made a lot of money doing that. Some people have lost some money. But it's also used in settings where the traditional banking system doesn't do so well at delivering payments quickly and with low fees.